for 2018's theme for Asian Pacific Island American Heritage Month. It's Enlighten and Empower, and it's something that a lot of EOC members and MOC members, we came together, and we wanted to kind of provide a voice and a message that empowers communities of color, and to kind of envision what the future looks like together, and through the API voice as well.
So our first performer today is Simeon Jacob.
Good morning, everyone. How are we doing today? Didn't realize I was gonna get the day started, the party started, but I'm glad to be here. Typically, whenever a Pacific Islander person is invited to these spaces, typically you get like a hula or something more traditional on typically the Polynesian side, but that's not gonna happen today. Yeah, I'm bringing you some new flavor, just because there's more than just what we see in the mainstream media. So today, again, my name is Simeon Jacob. I'm Micronesian, proud Micronesian. If you don't know where that's at, you follow the second bump on Australia, you follow your finger there. We're all up in there, 1,000 of islands, 1,000 tiny islands, tiny but very mighty. So today I'm gonna do a dance. It's to an artist, his name's Spawn Breezy. It's called Don't Let Go. Don't Let Go. The reason why I chose this song was like, for me, dance has something that, like, being a Pacific Islander, we get caught up in this mainstream. We, like, take my hand, yes, take my hand. Don't let go. What I really want to say is that whenever we move away from tradition, it feels like you're conspiring against them. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of dance, a little bit of movements that are similar to tradition, but I'm going to bring my own flavor to it. All right? And so the beat dropped a lot quicker than I expected. So I'm going to rewind it a little bit, and then we'll get into it. So thanks again.
Take my hand and don't let go. I'm addicted to your loving. But if you should know how my love goes, then baby stay close. Take my hand and don't let go. I'm addicted to your loving. But if you should know how my love goes, then baby stay close. You won't ever have to cry, no. So wipe them tears from your eyes. As long as you're by my side, you won't shed no tears, 'cause everything will be just fine. As long as you don't let go. Don't let go. Don't let go. No, 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 no. Don't let go. Baby, please don't let go. Everything will be just fine as long as you stay by my side. Don't let go. Take my hand and follow me. Follow me. I'll take you down a path so you can see of what this truly means. You are my queen. I'm down on my knees. I'm here to serve you, my dear love. anything you ask for, baby, is done. Yeah, yeah. I'll cater to you, anything you need. But baby, please, as long as you don't let go.
So next on our agenda, I'm very excited to introduce Kathy.
I use spoken word and poetry to share my stories that I think are important to my people, the Marshall Islands. The Marshall Islands is located in the northern Pacific region known as Micronesia. It's a 4-hour flight away from Hawaii, just so you figure where it's at. And so, yeah, a lot of my work is on climate change. It's also on the nuclear legacy of U.S. testing, the U.S. testing program in the Marshall Islands, which was conducted after World War II. And so I guess I'll share 2 poems. Is that okay, just to do 2 poems? I'll do 2 poems today. It's going to be a little bit more of a downer. I'm going to bring you down a little bit after Simeon's awesome wake-up performance. So this piece is actually one that I like to share because it's like a summary of that nuclear legacy, and this is something that I want people to know about. I always use every opportunity that I get to speak to share this history with people because it's something that not many people know of. So this is called History Project, and it's one of my older pieces. Okay. At 15, I decided to do my history project on nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands. Time to learn my history, I decide. I weave through book after article after website, all on how the US once used my island home for nuclear testing. I sift through political jargon, tables of nuclear weapons with names like Operation Bravo, Crossroads, and Ivy, quotes from generals like, 90,000 people are out there. Who cares? I'm not mad at all, really, I already knew all of this. I glance at a photograph of a boy, peeled skin, arms, legs suspended, a puppet, next to a lab coat lost in his clipboard. I read first-hand accounts of what we call jelly babies, tiny beings with no bones, skin, red tomatoes, the miscarriages gone unspoken, the broken translations. I never told my husband. I thought it was my fault. I thought there must be something wrong inside of me. I flipped through snapshots of American Marines and nurses branded white with bloated grins, sucking beers and tossing beach balls along our shores. And my islander ancestors cross-legged before a general, listening to his fairy tale about how it's for the good of mankind. To hand over our islands, let them blast radioactive energy into lazy-limbed coconut trees, into sagging breadfruit trees, into busy fishes that sparkle like new sun, into coral reefs brilliant as an aurora borealis woven beneath a glassy sea. God will thank you, they told us. Yeah, as if God himself ordained those powdered flakes to drift onto our skin, our hair, our eyes, to seep into our bones. We mistook radioactive fallout for snow. God will thank you, they told us, as if God's just been waiting for my people to vomit all of humanity's sins into impeccable white shores, gleaming like the cross burned into our open, scarred palms. At one point in my research, I stumbled along a photograph of goats. They're bored and munching on tubs of grass. At the bottom, there's this caption. It reads, "Goats and pigs were left on naval ships as test subjects. Thousands of letters flew in from America protesting animal abuse." At 15, I want megatons of TNT, radioactive energy, and a fancy degree, anything and everything I could ever need to send ripples of death through people who put goats before human beings, so their skin can shrivel beneath the glare of hospital room lights 3 generations later as they watch their mother, their auntie, their cousin's life drip across that same black screen, knots of knuckles tied to steel beds, cold and absent of any breath, but I'm only 15. So I finished my project. Graph my people's death by cancer on flowcharts in 3D. Glue stick my ancestors' voice onto a poster board I bought from Office Max. Staple tables screaming the millions of dollars they stuffed into our mouths generation after generation after generation. And at the top, I spray painted in bold, stenciled yellow, "For the good of mankind." And I entered it into a school district-wide competition called History Day. My parents were proud, and so was my teacher. And when the 3 balding white judges finally came around to my project, one of them looked at it and said, "Yeah, but it wasn't really for the good of mankind, though, was it?" And I lost. Thank you. So I wanted to share that piece because that gives a background to a lot of the ways in which Marshallese people, my people who are here in Oregon, a very good amount of Marshallese people live in Oregon at this time. This is the background in history that we are coming to the US with this experience of this US nuclear weapons testing program that has left us with some of the highest cancer rates in the world, islands that are uninhabitable, and homes that we can no longer return to. Besides that, we are now looking to a climate-threatened future. And so as Irene said, I did speak at the United Nations at the UN Climate Summit in 2014, and that's really where my career kind of launched, and I began to be inserted a lot more into conversations on climate change. So this is something that's affecting all of Pacific Islanders, of course. According to a recently released study from the University of Hawaii, we have as little as 30 years before the Marshall Islands becomes completely uninhabitable. The Marshall Islands is more threatened than other islands because we are a low-lying atoll nation, and so we are only 2 meters above sea level. And so any level of sea rise plus wave-induced flooding is making our islands unlivable. And so the next poem that I want to share is another older piece. It was written around the same time as History Project was written. And it's called Tell Them, and it's my first poem I ever wrote on climate change. And I think it's especially appropriate for this stage because the love that I feel for my islands and for my home is a love that I think a lot of Pacific Islanders can express, and a lot of people who are connected to their land can feel as well. And so this is a poem about that I wrote after I went home to the Marshall Islands. I experienced my first wave flooding, all this water all over the land crashing against our homes and destroying homes. And I guess I started to do research on climate change, and what struck me was all these articles just assuming that Marshallese people and the people of the Pacific would have to leave their homes at some point. And that really frustrated me because I don't think that we should have to leave and that there still is time to fight. And so this is a piece about that. Okay. I prepared the package for my friends in the States. First, the dangling earrings, woven into half moons, black pearls glinting like an eye in a storm of tight spirals. Second, the basket, sturdy, also woven, brown, cowrie shell shiny, intricate mandalas shaped by calloused fingers. Inside the basket, I write a message. Wear these earrings to parties, to classes and meetings, to the corner store, the grocery store, and while riding the bus. Store jewelry, incense, copper coins, and curling letters like this one in this basket. And when others ask you where you got this, you tell them they're from the Marshall Islands. Show them where it is on a map. Tell them we are a proud people, toasted dark brown as the carved ribs of a tree stump. Tell them we are descendants of the finest navigators in the world. Tell them our islands were dropped from a basket carried by a giant. Tell them we are the hollow hulls of canoes as fast as the wind slicing through the Pacific Sea. We're wood shavings and drying pandanus sleeves and sticky burros of kemims. Tell them we are sweet harmonies of mothers, aunties, sisters, songs late into night. Tell them we are whispered prayers, the breath of God, a crown of fuchsia flowers encircling Auntie Mary's white seafoam hair. Tell them we are dusty rubber slippers stolen from concrete doorsteps. We are the ripped seams and the broken door handles of taxis. We are a sweaty hand shaking another sweaty hand in heat. Tell them we are little girls with braids cartwheeling beneath the rain. We are shards of broken beer bottles burrowed beneath fine white sand. We are children flinging like rubber bands across a road clogged with chugging cars. Tell them we only have one road. And after all this, tell them about the water, how we have seen it rising, flooding across our cemeteries, gushing over our seawalls, and crashing against our homes. Tell them what it's like to see the entire ocean level with the land. Tell them we are afraid. Tell them we don't know of the politics or the science, but we see what's in our own backyard. Tell them some of us are old fishermen who believe that God made us a promise. Tell them some of us are a little bit more skeptical. But most importantly, you tell them that we don't want to leave. We've never wanted to leave. And that we are nothing without our islands. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lillian Ongalungul. I'm from Palau via Portland via Palau. My artwork is there in the back. I have three original pieces actually on the two outer sides and then the octopus to the left. The two pieces kind of squished in between are actually pieces by my dad, who is also an artist based in the Portland area. He's actually self-taught and colorblind, so that was the person I looked up to when it came to artwork, and much of my artwork is influenced by him. But my main subject matter is typically around identity, about Pacific Island identity as a queer woman in the Pacifica diaspora. So you'll see a lot of that in my artwork, as well as retellings of Palauan legends that really speak to community and the ways that we hold each other together. So thank you so much for having me here, Irene, and let me know if you want to have a little chat about the artwork.
Our panelists for today, we're going to have Consul General Joe Enlet come up. He was he worked for the health department as well, but now he's left us to work for a different government and is now Consul General for the Federated States of Micronesia. They just opened their consulate office here in Portland. We have Dr. Alma. She's a professor at PSU. And then we have Kalpana from Home Forward. She's here as well. They'll be joining us for our panel. And then Manumalo, she is going to be a little bit late, but it's okay. She's not late, it's island time.
My name is Kalpana. I use she and her pronouns, and I am the policy director and the field director at Forward Together. Forward Together works in Oregon and nationally to make sure that all families have the rights, recognition, and resources they need to thrive. And I was not born in Portland, but grew up here for the majority of my life. So I have an experience of being in the early wave, I think, of API, and particularly South Asians in our community, and some perspective on that I'm happy to share today.
Aloha kako. Kumusta kayo amin? I'm Alma, Trinidad, Associate Professor at Portland State University. I've been here since 2009. My ancestors are from Ilocos Norte in the Philippines, but I grew up, born and raised on the island of Molokai in Hawaii. And I teach in the School of Social Work. I teach across academic programs. I'm also a mother, and I'm so happy to be here. It's such an honor to be among you all in community.
Raranim. Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Enlet, and I was born and raised in Chuuk, next to Simeon's Island. And I used to work for the county health department. Woo! Come on. So now that I left, it doesn't seem like they want to root for me anymore. I see how it is. All right. I'm with the consulate, as Irene mentioned, and I'm very honored and humbled to be here with you. Thank you.
What has exemplified your experience being Asian or Pacific Islander in the U.S.?
I didn't read the questions.
Do you want a clarifying reflection?
Do you want to phone a friend?
My experience.
What's your experience been like being Asian or Pacific Islander? Yes, in the U.S.
All right. Okay. A lot of karaoke and. No, I'm just seeing some karaoke people out there. First of all, Simeon and Kathy, thank you for those presentations. I think that basically sums it up. You know, as a Pacific Islander, that's the story. You know, when you come to the U.S. and you never quite escape that story. That's written into your being and your DNA. So I'll just say that there are positives and there are negatives of being a Pacific Islander in the U.S. Being born and raised in the islands, in the island of Chuuk. Chuuk often is referred to as like the black hole in Micronesia. It's, you know, you get a negative reputation if you come from Chuuk. Sometimes, you know, not so deserving of that, but sometimes, you know, people do mess up. But I think that each person will have also their unique story to add to the larger story. So one experience that I often tell, many of you have heard it, so please just close your ears if you've heard it already. I was in California. When I first moved to California, you know, I was going to school. I was on campus. They had these this group that was like the hospitality group, right? And they were coming out and then, you know, meeting new students, and I just thought I was special, right? So they had this group, and you know, a bunch of girls were there, and they're like, "Hey, Joe," you know, talking to you. That's in Micronesia, you're not approached by, you know, girls. So you're approached if they find interest, right? So I'm like, all right. So I'm just a cool guy. Says that, man, I love America. So they come out, and you know, and they're like, you know, welcoming me and say, "Hey, if you want to, you know, go do this and do that." I'm like, "Really?" They're like, "Yeah." So then they come and tell me, "Hey, let's go and have dinner." And I'm like, "All right, yeah, for sure." And then, you know, before the time, you know, for the dinner was up, I was already like fully dressed, you know, put on cologne, and like, you know, I was on my A game, you know. So they came out and they said, "Let's go." So we went to this Thai restaurant, and we started ordering food, and they're like, "You can order anything." I'm like, "Anything?" They're like, "Yeah, go ahead." So we started ordering food. I was ordering left and right, you know, I was enjoying the food. And towards the end of the meal, they started pulling out their wallets, right? And I'm like, all right, why is everybody taking out their wallets? You know, and I realized, oh my gosh, we pay for our own food. So little did I know. You know, in the islands, if you're invited, the person inviting pays for it. That's just the understanding, right? And I'm like, okay, and I knew I had nothing, I had zero in my pocket, right? And here I am, like being this charming guy, you know, trying to be cool and everything, and now I have no money to pay for my meal, right? It's the most embarrassing day in a young man's life. So I reach into my pocket and I'm praying. I'm praying in Chuukese, I'm praying in English. Our Father, Hail Mary, everything. All right. So I reach into my wallet and I take out my wallet and say, "Lord, if ever you are in heavens, please, this is the time to show up." So I reach inside and I feel a little plastic card. And I pull it out. Guess what? It's my uncle's credit card. And he specifically told me, for emergency purposes only. I said, Lord, This is an emergency. So I swiped that thing, and I'm like, yep. I said, never again. Never again. Awkward, funny. At the same time, there's this sense of sadness inside me for not knowing. And it made me feel like, oh, I'm stupid. I didn't know. But it's a mixture of feelings. That's my experience.
It's a hard act to follow, Joe. Oh, well, that's a really good question to ask at the get-go. Well, I identify as a Pinay scholar, warrior of Kapu Aloha, Mahalaya. I'm going to dissect each term so you kind of know what it is. Pinay, meaning Filipina. Scholar, somebody who goes and get a degree in higher ed. And for me, I decided to choose the doctoral path after working as a social worker and a macro organizer in Hawaii. I decided to take that path because there were, I guess you can say, data about our communities in Hawaii, Filipinos, Native Hawaiians, and other Pacific Islanders, and the data around suicide, health outcomes, depression, school dropout. It wasn't providing the full picture for me. And at that time in my life, a young adult, I decided, okay, I gotta participate in dissecting, deconstructing, decolonizing the knowledge that is made available to the dominant community. Because there were a lot of framing around our communities that looked at struggles, that looked at disparities, and it wasn't the whole picture. So scholar is that, I guess you can say, that responsibility around teaching, the new, I guess you can say, emerging professionals. And for me, I'm a social worker, so deciding to take that path to educate and inspire those that are deciding to take that professional path. And I also teach across different programs in a helping profession. The other pillar is research, so loving research, particularly around community-based research, community-based participatory research methods, and most importantly, using knowledge to sort of unpack the power dynamics of our people and using research as the knowledge tool to do that. And the last leg for a scholar, it's around serving our communities, serving our people, serving the people, I guess you can say the communities I came from, struggled with, and be uplifted with. So that three roles of a scholar. So aloha, kapu aloha in Hawaiian means sacred radical love. Mahalaya, or mahalaya, which means love, radical, freedom, lover. So those are some of the things that I embody my work as a mom as well, as a community person, and in every space that I occupy. And I have, I guess you can say, many milestones and stories such as Joe, but I guess I'm gonna change it up a little because being a woman, I need to feminize this path. I mean, when I look around, particularly in higher ed, in the academy, there's so few of us, female of color, and it's like entering this isolated corporate world. It's very isolating, and you go through and navigate the journey, and you make decisions around your life and around what you want to do, and it's isolating. But what inspires me is our communities. It's our people. The stories that I hear, a lot of them are really deep things that touch my heart and move me. Sometimes, and I'm also a feeler, hence the social worker in me. And so when I feel it's so deep, and there's a lot of mourning and grieving of information and stories and data, let it be numbers, that you hear and read. And to feminize that, to sort of unpack power, it's heavy. It's a heavy burden. And I recently obtained tenure about 2 years ago, being tenured at Portland State at a very white institution. And I still look around, and I still, to this day, question, is this the path I should move forward to? And is this the path that I'm willing to partake in and take my new sword like a warrior and continue to fight and uplift our communities? So I'll just hold it into that. I mean, and I'll be happy to explore and share stories with you on a personal level. But I guess you can say it's been challenging. It's been a lot of mourning, but nevertheless, a lot of beauty and love that I've observed with our students, with the young people, with our communities, our mothers, and just finding that collectivity around.
So I want to do a quick raise of hands. I'm going to ask 4 questions. How many people were in Portland in 2010? Okay. How many folks were in Portland in 2000? How many folks were in Portland in 1990? How many folks were in Portland in 1980? How many folks were in Portland in 1970? Right? Oh, did I miss one? Okay. All right. So, you know, my experience is very different than the 2 folks I share a panel with. So I was born in the United States. My father came to this country in 1969, right after the liberalization of the U.S. immigration laws, which took racial quotas out of our immigration system and allowed people primarily from non-white countries to immigrate to the United States. My mom and dad have an arranged marriage, like most of the folks in my community of their generation, so they didn't know each other. They met each other through writing letters, and then met each other on the 23rd of December, got married on the 25th, and left India on the 26th. So when they came, they arrived in California, and there was a relatively big South Asian community, and there were a couple people that spoke my father's language, and then they decided to move to Portland. And there was nobody here, right? There was nobody here that was South Asian. At least in Los Angeles, he could find 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 people that spoke the language that he spoke. And my mom could find her 1 or 2 people that spoke the language she spoke. In Portland, there was nothing. There was nobody I was ever raised with that spoke either of my parents' languages. So my parents had to build their community from the ground up, right? And so if you were anywhere from South Asia, Pakistani, come on down. Afghani, come on down. Sri Lankan, come on down. Fiji will take you. Right? So my parents were one of the founding folks that helped to build the India Cultural Association, right? So my childhood is full of being in rented gymnasiums that smell like gym socks celebrating Diwali, right? It is all of us giggling about Happy Thanksgiving as we put the chicken korma on our plate. Right? So right, it was very clear that the community, it didn't matter what language you spoke, what state you were from, what caste you were, what your profession was, you were going to be in this South Asian family because we needed you, right? And that is a really different place than the Portland of today. So too many of us think that the Portland of today, with Intel and its fabulous engineers, that is the South Asian representation. But we know, everyone in this room knows that it's not just Intel engineers, right? All the folks that own the stores on Interstate, that own the motels on Interstate, they're also part of my community. So I want to tell a couple stories. My first is about phone book friends. At my house, you would get a phone call, usually right before bedtime, and it would be somebody calling from the airport. And they would say, I just saw your name in the airport. I'm at the Portland airport. Can you come pick me up? This is not a person you know. This is a person who is looking through the white pages for Indian names and calling them 1 by 1. Some of my parents' best friends are phone book friends, right? So growing up, I had this little community of South Asians that I was with. Those were my people, like those are my cousins. I certainly wasn't gonna date any of them because you can't date your cousins, which, you know, I was like, that's the problem of being in such a small community. Then we all feel like family and you don't wanna get romantic with your family. So then I went to college, right? I went to University of Oregon, and I went to school at St. Mary's, and it was the first place that I really felt like I could be Indian. In a room full of women, I felt like I could be Indian, right? Mostly white women, to be honest. But it was the place where I didn't have to worry about what the boys would think, and so I started wearing bindis and wearing the clothes that I only wore to someone's basement out in public. So then I go to college and I'm starting to have this Indian identity. It's starting to mean something other than just when I'm with Indian people who feel like my family. I'm having this Indian identity that means something else. And I'm trying to figure out where my people are. So I go to the APASU meeting, Asian Pacific American Student Union. And I walk in and there are 50 Asians in that room. And not a single one of them looks like me. And I'm like, oh, cool. Okay, that's cool. This is not my space. This is not my space. So then I go to the India Student Association and I walk in and it's all Indian graduate students who are here from India. And I'm like, that's cool, also not my space, right? So growing up in this era of Oregon, right, in the 1990s and the 1980s, finding your community, finding your people was hard. And we did it anyway. We've had our phone book friends. Now we have the Facebook version of that, right? When my cousins came from India, they were like on Craigslist looking for the other Kannada speakers in Denver, Colorado, and finding their roommates that way. So we will always find our people, right? We will always find our people, as somebody said. The last story I'll share is really about the complicated identities that I think Asians have in Oregon. When I first moved back home, I left for a while. I lived in New York. I lived in the Midwest. And I came back home and I started doing some work in social justice spaces. So, you know, with people like you. And I went to a gathering that I was leading for women of color. And somebody stood up in the meeting and said, I don't understand why you're here. Asian women are not women of color. And I was like, well, I kind of organized the space, so just FYI, I get to stay, right? But I think there's a hierarchy, right? There's a hierarchy in communities of color, and that hierarchy is partly about numbers. It's partly about our experiences and visibility. It's partly about the very real different oppressions our communities have faced. And one of the things that it has been so important to me to do is to find ways to build multiracial, cross-racial, with other folks of color community and solidarity, because that's what all of us are gonna need to be free. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Okay, so do you have any cultural or family traditions that you still continue to use in your career?
I'm looking out for some ideas from the crowd. Oh, wait, am I starting? Okay.
You started talking.
Cultural practices or traditions?
If you use any in your career.
In my career, okay. You know, I was thinking, so is it okay if I go off script a little bit? Yeah. Sure. I was also thinking about like sitting up here and facing you all. I think one of the, you know, if you talk about my experience, I have, and because of some of the work I've done and the work of a lot of people, I've been kind of in the public eye as like the Pacific Islander voice, right? And I also want to say again, I'm going to reiterate that feeling again of sadness. even though I'm honored and it's great to be here and to have space to talk, there's also sadness in it because, you know, we call it tokenism, is what the formal word is for it. But it's sad that we need to be given space to justify our existence, right? There is need for it. It's kind of a struggle, you know. Like, do I want to go there again and to speak now and be in the limelight? But then 364 days out of the year, you're just an afterthought, you know. So there is real angst, even as a panel member here. So I just wanted to put that out. So let's go to the positive. What traditional thing do I still do? That is one thing I will say, and you'll notice this about Pacific Islanders. We love humor. And I'll tell you, I bring humor to my career, to everything that I do. Irene and the organizers here can attest to that. They emailed me like yesterday and said, hey, parking situation, tell it. They're very formal, you know, like, hey, if you need parking, let us know by this time. If you're going to show up, whatever. So I emailed back and I said, oh yeah, I'm going to be sailing there on a Micronesian canoe using Pacific, and I didn't know that there were other people included on the email. So, you know, I'll use traditional navigation and please provide valet service for the canoe. And that was my response. But that's how we do it in the islands also, because, you know, humor is something that is part of our culture. It makes us, it brings us closer together. It makes us make light of things that are serious. It's not a coping mechanism, I will say that. It's a way of being in the world. You need to have also humor to be able to overcome a lot of the challenges and stresses that are true, you know, that you face, microaggressions, you know, the whole gamut. But that's one thing that I like to mention is, you know, we use a lot of humor. And there are some really humorous Pacific Islanders out here. I'm pointing at them. So if you want to, you know, learn more about that, they will have humor from the churches and the pulpit down to, like, you know, your backyard, everywhere. But it's part of our culture.
I wouldn't call this a tradition, but I think it's a way of life or just a way of greeting and being with community. I'm a very affectionate person, so hugs and kisses are very, I mean, like, to see a fellow Asian Pacific Islander in white spaces, that's uncommon here in Portland. And when you do, you feel like you're in a family setting and hugging. And I want to say that and mention that because there's so much framing around harassment, physical touch. And yes, I want to acknowledge the seriousness of that, but also how that just comes naturally for some of us from the islands and, you know, from collective communities where embracing and greeting someone that you can find commonality and being in solidarity is sort of like that ritual that we just do second nature. And to sort of police that and say, don't do it, it's inappropriate, I sometimes feel that we need to be in conversations around that and whatnot. So that's the micro part. I'll give you a more formal part around tradition. I think for me, when I teach, I've been recently incorporating chanting and song and poetry, inspired by many of our Asian Pacific Islander artists here, just to honor our voices and to sort of bless the space that we occupy to sort of start that voyage of unpacking knowledge, to be in learning spaces, and to move and transform our communities. So that's something that I've been sort of embracing and holding on and doing it in spaces that hasn't traditionally been done. So yeah, and that's some of the small ways that as long as I feel like I have power and control in a space, I'll evoke that.
You know, again, this is an interesting one for me because I feel like the experience of being first generation in the States is an experience of separation from some of the traditional experiences of your culture. So when I think about what of my traditions do I bring into my work, I got to go through many layers to figure out what that is. And it all comes from the values, right? It's not, I don't chant, right? I don't speak any of my parents' languages, so I can't chant. I don't dance, right? Because there was no school to learn from when I grew up in Portland. There was one auntie who taught out of her garage that we all went to, you know, at least once. And then if you, like me, really had no rhythm, she was like, maybe something else for you. So when I think about what are the actual cultural practices, right, it's hard, I can't put my fingers on it, right? I can't put my fingers on it. And so there's a loss there, right? And then I think about my biracial children. I'm married to an American, which for white people means a white person. And, you know, I have kids that don't look like me, right? My kids could pass for white and have brown first names and white last names. And what am I, if I am like, as I say regularly, 100% Indian, but half the Indian my parents are, then what kind of Indian are my kids gonna be, right? So when I think about the practices in my day-to-day work, I have to go all the way down to the values that my family raised me with, to the values of our culture, but I can't pick out practices. I think that makes the experience that I've had, it's just speaking for me, that I've had, very different than the experiences that y'all are able to relate.
By the way, I told Joe that he could park his canoe here if he is able to. If he is able to parallel park this thing in downtown Portland, I see no reason why it should not be able to be parked in our parking structure here. So, I replied. And then we'll just mix these two questions together, and we'll kind of finish off with this. But what are key issues what key issues do you and your community face living in America, and what kind of changes do you want to see in Multnomah County for Asian and Pacific Islanders?
It's a big one.
Yes, a big one.
Joe should have read the questions beforehand.
Okay.
No, just kidding.
Okay, I guess I'll start again. So you can write a dissertation on that question, but let me just point out a few things. I think one of the things that Pacific Islanders face is invisibility. And I think that, you know, there's not too many Pacific Islanders that you'll run into that are like, you know, that would say that, you know, everybody recognizes what they do, or like, there are a lot of places where the identity of Pacific Islanders is like met with a big question mark. People just don't know how to place you. And also, a lot of our struggles don't ever rise to the top. speaking for Pacific Islanders, there are we face the same barriers to social justice like other groups, but there are also very unique stories and challenges. For instance, there was a lady here who was talking about Kofa Islanders who can come and live freely in the United States and pay their taxes, but they have no pathway to citizenship. They can't vote. They can never become green card holders. They don't qualify for Medicaid, Medicare, SNAP, SSI benefits, food stamps, you name it. And yet they can freely come and go. And you say that and people are like, what? We've never heard of this. Like, how can this be? But that is a reality for a lot of Pacific Islanders from Micronesia. And lawmakers, policymakers, people who work in service agencies don't know a thing about Micronesians. So that's what I mean when I say invisibility. And also just invisibility because there's not too many of us. But there is a big community in my view because I see people, I know the Pacific Islanders. So that is an experience of a lot of our family members being misunderstood, being treated differently because they don't know how to classify you. And then what advice, or what was that? What was the last part of the question? What kind of changes do you want? Changes you want to see in Multnomah County? Multnomah County as in like the county? Or like the geographical Multnomah County? Okay. Okay. I'll just answer generally. A place where we don't need to have, get to a place where we don't need to say, okay, let's have a panel of Pacific Islanders to tell us more about the stories of Pacific Islanders. A society where we all give each other the same respect and space and courtesy and love, where we're all equal. That's kind of the change that we want to see. That's a tall order, but we can dream, right? Imagine a better reality.
I'll go. I'm sure this will be a common theme, but I do think a fundamental issue for all of our communities is visibility. And that, it's funny when you were talking about like, I come from a huggy people. I was like, I don't. I was like, don't touch me. Okay. Yeah. I was like, don't touch me. So I think like there's such this Asian Pacific Islander is a political identity. It is a political identity that was created out of the civil rights struggle. It was an identity created to give us greater visibility. If we don't understand that, and it was created around political solidarity. If we don't understand that that's where it came from, that's a problem for us, right? And we need to be able to tell that story, and we also need to be able to see the diversity of the entire API community. We're like 75% of the world combined, right? Population-wise. So we should act like that, right? And be given the weight of that. So I think there's a way in which for us as API folks, we need to better understand our own conditions and the diversity of our communities, and we don't always start from that place, right? I need to carry the water for my Pacific Islander brothers and sisters, right? I need to do that work. I think something that that's connected to that, right, is that there is a lot of work that we need to do inside of our own communities, and that we need to be doing kind of through our social justice values. So, I teach at my temple right now, and I'm one of the only people I'm the only person in my generation that teaches. Everybody else is a direct immigrant. So when the kids are relating to me at first, because I have to wear a sari and the blah, blah, blah. And so it takes the kids like multiple weeks to understand I'm the same generation as them. right? No, I went to St. Mary's, I went to U of O, I'm the same gender, like listen to my accent. I don't sound like your parents, right? But it takes them a while because they just see the clothes, right? And part of the reason I'm teaching is because I did not have a model of what it looked like to be myself 20 years forward. I didn't know what it would look like to be a 40-year-old Indian but raised in America. And I want these kids to see that, and I want these kids to see progressive social justice values. So in my class, we talk about gay stuff, right? In my class, we talk about the school shootings in Parkland. And I ask those kids, what are you doing about the school shooting? Have you talked to your parents about participating in the walkouts? Don't just walk out, have the conversation with your mom and dad first about why you're doing it. Now let's go through and tie it to our Hindu values. What do we know about Hinduism that tells us that you should be walking out, right? How do you make the case? So I think there's a lot of organizing that we need to do internally in our own communities to make sure that every child that comes up out of the South Asian community right now knows they are loved for exactly who they are. And that's not work anyone else can do. That's work that our communities have to do for ourselves, right? But we should be in strategy and conversation with one another because there's so much alignment across our communities about the issues and cultures that we come from that we should know how to handle it and how to be better allies, right? The two things that I'll just wrap up with are, one, the anti-immigrant sentiment is rising in Oregon. We all know that. We've seen it. We know that since the election 2 years ago, there's been an increase. But for those of us that have lived here, we've also seen that there's been anti-immigrant sentiment the whole time we've been here. This is just a different, more public version of the thing that has happened to our moms every time we go into the grocery store or every time we go to the airport, and somehow I'm randomly searched every time, right? So the anti-immigrant sentiment is now moving through law and policy, and our communities need to be very aware of that. So currently there's a ballot measure that is circulating that is an anti-immigrant ballot measure that would take away Oregon's 30-year-old sanctuary law and would allow the local police, or would force the local police to enforce immigration laws. Our communities need to be very aware of that, right? And participating and engaging. And then the last thing I'll just say is someone at the very beginning was like, disaggregated data. And I was like, yeah. Right? Because we cannot know about our own conditions if we don't get out of this API umbrella. It has a value. The API umbrella has a value, and I never want to throw that away. But it is also deeply important that we understand what's happening in a small micro-shot way for every one of our communities. And that's the only way that we can have each other's backs and understand the policies that are going to affect the diverse communities that come from different places, right? As I wrap up, I'll just share that Forward Together, the organization I work for, it always does a really great Mama's Day event. And so I've got information about our Mama's Day event on Tuesday, May 8th. It's a community celebration. We're really lifting Black mamas this year. We've lifted immigrant mamas for the last couple years. We're really lifting Black mamas and holding their right to parent, but encouraging all mamas to come to the event and to build community with us. Thanks.
I want to acknowledge that my two fellow panelists have had great ideas, and as you both were talking, I was also looking around who is present. I also want to laugh at the fact that we are being recorded, so everything we say here is public. Yeah, you're here. You made it.
Just want to apologize. I just came from taking an exam that was proctored, and so I literally just left right after I was done.
We're so happy that you're here. So we're doing the last question around like issues and recommendations for the county. So I'm going to speak from being a professor and a researcher and whatnot, and also a social worker who's worked with youth and young adults. When I look around in our immigrants and communities of color, youth and young adults and families, and the systems, I use a life course theory in my work, and I apply that in my practice and my teaching and whatnot. And when you think about children, youth, and families as they walk through life, and the systems and the organizations and institutions that they face as they seek out help, services, and sort of that support. And then vice versa, the people that are working in those spaces have really dire respect. They have this really great responsibility to uphold strong ethics and a standard of care and an ethics of care, ethics of love. And I know who I'm speaking with. I know I'm speaking to county workers, officials, and maybe people who just started their careers in the county, as well as community members. We all have a part in upholding or exuding that ethics of love, ethics of aloha. And it's a responsibility. And simultaneously, these systems that we interface are also colonized spaces, colonized systems. And so when the two meet, family, community, and then whatever it is, system, institutions, organizations, are there alignments in values? Are there alignments in cultural responsiveness? Are there alignments in addressing the disparities that exist in a community? Are we meeting the needs? And so these are things that I question as a scholar, as a teacher, and things that I encourage my students and mentees to think about as they partake in their journey. As whatever field they choose, let it be in social work, a health worker, or even a lawyer and whatnot, everyone has a role, including the person that first responds to the telephone call or email of a youth or a family that is seeking, I need this. Even those that arrive in the airport, I'm here. Are you all gonna welcome me? Are you all gonna welcome the family? And these are things that I think we constantly clash. There's, policies, procedures are embedded, and I encourage us to continuously deconstruct, decolonize, and explore and examine the power and control in all of it. So that's just me in general, because I know we're looking at time, and I also want to share the time with our co-panelists.
So Malo just joined us. Thank you. Just kind of to wrap up and to give Malo maybe just a few minutes of space here, we'll ask you the last question, and then maybe you could just answer for a few minutes. But the question is, what key issues do you or your community face living in America, and what kind of changes do you want to see in Multnomah County?
That's a great question, and I apologize for being late. Again, I was coming from a proctored exam. So I think I will just start off by explaining all the different identities that I claim. I am Samoan, which is a Pacific Islander. I am also gender nonconforming. I also, in terms of sexual orientation, am a lesbian and queer. And living in those types of intersections, I feel like I can't completely be my true self, but I'm oftentimes divided into 3 or 4 different types of identity circles and communities. And I think as I've gotten older and having been living here in the Portland area for a little over 4 years now, how to navigate in a new city is really challenging when you talk about identities, because you want to be able to share yourself and your narrative. So I didn't know of anybody when I moved here other than my coworkers with my company, and branching out in terms of getting involved in the community through Apano, and also with the LGBTQ community through the Q Center. And last year I just started a new organization, UTOPIA PDX, which provides sacred spaces to strengthen the minds and bodies of cutie pies, which are queer and trans Pacific Islanders, through community organizing, political engagement, and cultural stewardship. It's easy to kind of navigate as a new organization because there were so many gaps and there were so many different disparities that I felt, we just had one person here and then all these resources over there, and how do we mend that gap? For me, finding my people, my cutie pies, and then also existing folks in our Pacific Islander communities or Asian communities, as well as folks that are in the LGBTQ community. It was really trying to pull from these different areas. So I intentionally got involved with Apano, and I intentionally got involved with the Q Center because I felt that being in these two major spaces that I can hold for my cutie pies was definitely important. And I see that it's 1 o'clock. So what I want for you all to take with you today is, if you're offering solidarity to anyone, make sure that you're solid. All right, thank you.
Thank you. So just to say thank you to our panelists, we have a little gift for them. We usually give a lei when you walk in. Joe called me out on it, but I was like, I'm gonna wait until this. So thank you. And then we have Lillian here. She'll be giving, we have a thank you card, Joe. No. We have a thank you card and a print done by Lillian. The artist at the back, so if you want to show that. We figured we should frame it because no one will frame their own prints, so we framed it for you. That's the valet service, pretty much. Yeah.
We have our very first Multnomah County API Commissioner, Roy Stegmann.
Oh, it is so great to be here. I'm so sorry I couldn't be with you here earlier. Trust me, I would have much rather have been here. So good afternoon. It is such an honor to join you today to celebrate the diversity of our API families and communities. I wanted to start off by showing you some pictures of my family. So this is my family, and as you can see, there isn't a lot of family resemblance in these pictures. But I do have to tell you, I was my mom's favorite. Don't tell your kids that. So I show you these today because when we talk about diversity, not only are we talking about a particular race or ethnicity, but we are talking about the greater community and how each of us is entwined. So I thought I'd begin with sharing my story. I was adopted from Seoul, South Korea, to Walt and Edna Stegmann. My dad was a logger in Placerville, California, and my mom was a homemaker. Some of you may have heard of Holt International and of Harry and Bertha Holt, who lived in Cresswell, Oregon, not far from Eugene. The Holts became pioneers in international adoption and became famous for something called the Holt Airlift, where over 3,000 babies, mostly mixed race, were adopted to American families in the late 50s and early 60s. I was one of those babies. I arrived at the Portland International Airport on a cargo plane with about 100 other babies. I was one of the lucky ones. There were some babies that were so malnourished that they did not survive the flight. Like many immigrants and refugees, I was not seeking just a better life, but life itself. It is from these humble beginnings that my path was laid. I felt a deep responsibility to not squander what I have been given: the gift of a loving home, a quality public education, and a career that has enabled me to support myself and my family. And while I am well aware of my current privilege and position of power as a county commissioner, there have been times when I felt merely tolerated and not fully accepted. I always felt pressured to stay within certain social norms and not take the risks that perhaps some of my more privileged colleagues and co-workers never gave a second thought to. Sometimes that was due to my gender, my socioeconomic standing, and sometimes it was due to my race. But I do believe that things are changing for the better. More and more, I sit in meetings where the majority of the decision makers are women, and many are women of color. You might be aware that for the first time in history, we have a majority-minority board. And as the first Korean American, yes, let's clap. And while you're doing that, I always tell people, I'm a crier, so I'm sorry. It's hard not to talk about your personal story and not become a little bit emotional about it. Okay, so where was I? Let's see. So, but things are changing. And as the first Korean American and the first Asian American to serve on the board in 163 years, thank you. It's a long time. I am elated to represent our API communities. One of the reasons Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month was chosen to be held in May was to mark the anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad on May 10th, 1869, 149 years ago. The majority of the workers who laid these tracks were Chinese immigrants. This coast-to-coast railroad connection revolutionized the settlement and economy of the West. It brought the Western states and the territories into alignment with the Northern Union states and made transporting passengers and goods coast to coast considerably quicker and less expensive. Indeed, the U.S. and its early infrastructure was built by immigrants. Another reason Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month was chosen to be held in May was to commemorate the immigration of the first Japanese to the U.S. on May 7, 1843, 175 years ago. Many Japanese immigrants arrived first on the Hawaiian Islands in the 1860s to work the sugarcane fields, and then moved to the U.S. mainland and settled in California, Oregon, and Washington, where they worked primarily as farmers and fishermen. Barred from participation in the country's legal or political systems, including citizenship, Japanese immigrants developed their own community, creating education and business opportunities for themselves. Ironically, also in May, on May 6, 1942, Executive Order 9066 was signed by then-President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Last year, I had the honor of attending Return and Remembrance in commemoration of the 75th anniversary of this racist act. This event, sponsored by the Japanese American Citizens League, provided a portal back to a time when our Japanese brothers and sisters endured racist and inhumane treatment at our own Portland Expo Center. Nearly 3,700 Japanese American citizens and legal residents were incarcerated there where their only crime was their ancestry. All across the U.S., 120,000 American citizens were required by law to register, abide by a curfew, abandon their homes and businesses, and eventually be imprisoned, all with the stroke of a pen. And as I sat there listening to these harrowing stories about the forced removal of incarcerated families who lost everything, I felt sick to my stomach. I thought, how could this have ever happened? And then I remembered that democracy is not something that you fight for just once in a while. It is something that must be cherished, guarded, fought for, and not ever taken for granted. And that we must be vigilant in protecting it. And if you ever doubt that one person can make a difference, look up Minoru Usui. He was a 26-year-old University of Oregon graduate and attorney born in Hood River who challenged the curfew by walking around downtown Portland after hours. He eventually went to the police station and demanded to be arrested so that his case could test the constitutionality of the curfew and the singling out of U.S. citizens based on their ancestry. He spent 9 months in solitary confinement. He lost his case at the Supreme Court and then was sent to the incarceration camp in Minidoka, Idaho. Minoru Yusui would later say, "This was not a sudden decision. I did it deliberately. It seemed to me that someone had to do it, and the ultimate choice became that since nobody else could do it, I did." And because of his bravery, in 1983, the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians concluded that the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II was a grave injustice, and the decision to incarcerate them was based on racial prejudice, wartime hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. The U.S. Congress formally recognized that the rights of the Japanese American community had been violated, and President Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, providing an apology and restitution to the living Japanese Americans who were incarcerated during World War II. Yeah, we should clap about that. In 2016, President Obama posthumously awarded Yusui the Presidential Medal of Freedom, America's highest civilian honor. And here in Oregon, House Bill 4009 was passed, designating March 28th as Minoru Yusui Day. And while things are getting better, they are not good enough for many. I am so grateful that I have the opportunity to weigh in and be part of the leadership that will transform the culture, not just here at the county, but throughout our communities. I want to thank Chair Kafori and our entire board for taking this monumental first step of implementing our workforce equity strategic plan. It is one thing to say that we recognize the disparities in our workforce. It is quite another to put our money where our mouth is. But I'm excited to say that that is exactly what we did. The chair's proposed budget released last week has a $500,000 commitment to begin the implementation of this important strategic plan. But that didn't happen magically, and even if it seems like that this has moved quickly, I know that the Employees of Color Resource Group have worked for years on developing this plan. So I want to, yes, let's give them a round of applause. So I want to recognize them for their determination and grit to see this strategy come to fruition and for being the seed of change. They remind me of the Margaret Mead quote, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." While I'm proud of my Korean heritage and culture, I know that there are many Asian and Pacific Islander ethnic groups who are both very diverse in language and culture, and yet much of the data collected on us would imply that we are one homogeneous group. We are not. And the more we can disaggregate the data and analyze the unique challenges that face our diverse communities, the better we can close those gaps. So there are a lot of political and social issues facing us, from immigration and health equity to limited representation in leadership roles. There are various tools members of our community can use to build political power, so I wanted to mention a few of those. Number one, volunteer. Get involved in your favorite charity, become a board member on a nonprofit. 2, run for an office like I did. Join your local school board. And if you can't run, then support other Asian and Pacific Islanders. 3, 90% of life is just showing up. Attend marches, rallies, and events that align with your values. 4, build and get to know your networks and be familiar with other APIs in the community. For me, it has been so much fun to be more involved with the Korean Studies program at Portland State, with Greg Caldwell, the Korean Honorary Consul, and organizations like Kalpana and API Forward. Number 5, be the first. As I mentioned, I'm the first commissioner on Multnomah County's board in 163 years with an API ancestry. 6, testify and bring the voices of our communities to the policy table by advocating for our issues. Attend city council meetings, county commission meetings, and the legislature. If we're going to advance more API leaders into prominence, we need to have our voices heard by bringing our stories and data to the public process. And 7, keep pushing for disaggregated data, raising important issues, and highlight how they disproportionately impact our communities. And lastly, embrace who you are and where you come from. So for me, growing up in a dominantly white culture, I did not have easy access to my Korean culture and customs. And as a youth, I kind of felt like society frowned upon me exploring my roots. I don't know if other immigrants have felt that way to some degree, that once you are in America, that you should leave where you came from behind you. You shouldn't. But as I have matured, I've felt a strong pull to learn more about my heritage. So last October, my daughter Rachel and I traveled back to Seoul, South Korea for the first time. And I have to tell you, I fell in love with Korea. The people, the food, the culture, all of it was so incredible. And it explained a lot about why I can eat fish for breakfast. Something I had not expected was the psychological impact of seeing a city of 10 million people who look like me. I had never consciously thought about that, but there was something affirming, something calming about seeing my face reflected in a place that was so foreign and yet so familiar. Oh, okay, where am I? I think about that experience and how it relates to the role that I have to play here. Seeing is believing. And it is my hope that if other women and communities of color see me in a leadership role, that they will know that they too have a voice in the room and a seat at the table. Thank you for having me here today to celebrate the outstanding achievements of our API communities and our contributions to our state and country. Let's make sure that we continue to honor those who came before us by paving the way for those who are here today and for those who will follow in our footsteps. Thank you so much.
And Commissioner Stegmann, we have a gift for you as well.
Thank you for coming. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
So up next, we have a couple talented poets. I'd like to invite our first poet, Neil Aitken. I'll just share a little soundbite about him. He is the author of 2 books of poetry called The Lost Country of Sight, and he won the Philip Levine Prize and Babbage's Dream, as well as a chapbook of poetry called Leviathan. Did I do that right? He's also the founding editor of Boxcar Poetry Review, and his poems have appeared in multiple literary journals. Neil.
I am of Chinese and Scottish and English ancestry. When we speak of visibility, I carry a name that renders me basically invisible because the name I go by and publish by is Neil Aitken, which is as Scottish as you can get. It gets confusing because I have a middle name which belongs to a culture which is not mine. My middle name is Tangaroa. My father served as a missionary in New Zealand and in the Cook Islands and fell in love with the islands and brought back the culture and the language and the appetite. And the humor. So that is somehow tied into me. I'm going to read 2 poems from my first book, which was called The Lost Country of Sight. The Art of Forgetting. How to swim, how to ride a bike, even how to voice my own name in my mother's tongue. Each sound a hard and pitted salt plum I marry to my teeth, but cannot break open. Forgetting is in the blood, something gleaned from my grandmother, her hate strong enough to wipe clean the first 2 years of married life, the loss of her world, my mother's birth. When I wake this morning to the cloud-dimmed Taipei sky and dress in that early light that filters in somehow through 100 shades of smog, it is hard to believe it has been a year already in this home not quite home. Here at the gate of memory, I am not my grandmother, grown transparent with age, but rather some lost son come in stranger's clothes, the air ripe with incense and ash. I want to remember this year and the one yet to be. They say that the muscles have memory, that the body recalls an emotion rehearsed over time. An old horse always returns. Mile after mile, my body relearns Taiwan the hard way. I feel it when I move, in the way my calves have hardened, in the scar on my chest where my muscles split wide when a truck door opened in front of my bike, in the calluses on my knees where I have knelt every morning on the cement and tile floors and offered a prayer full of fire and forgetting for someone to come down, to loosen my tongue, to unlock that rusted door and let what beats within go free. This is entitled Kundiman, and this is inspired by, there's a writing community, a retreat and literary organization on the East Coast called Kundiman, which serves API writers. And they have a summer retreat. And it used to be in Virginia, which you need to know because that's where the first line opens. But it's now in New York. And I think about this poem and I think about this experience. I want to dedicate this to anyone that works in the creative arts, anyone that works with language and with story, which I think is all of us and our heritage and our traditions. This is, and the other thing you need to know is that Kundiman is a Filipino term for a type of love song, which is historically also a song that was used to sing of one's love for country, but hide it under the story of another love. This morning, the sun not yet piercing the gray Virginia world, I wake already with longing for those I soon will leave, whose voices raw and importuning have peeled away my skin and laid open my chest with the finest of cuts. Here in the space enclosed by the white bones of my ribs, a heart beats with the wonder of so many tongues. No, it moves like a ship on this dark ocean of home and departure, each of us rowing beat after beat, page after page, haunted by words. Speak again of salt, lovers lost, of the body muted, of our fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, daughters, sons, you who knock at the wooden door of a guitar at midnight, you who let words carry your limbs and lips, you who rumble deep into sorrow or anger or unrequited joy. Tell me now, who will lift us when we are weary? Who will fill us with that dark beauty of song? What will we say tomorrow when we rise to take our next train, next bus, next taxi or plane, when we return to the cities we have loved or despised for so long? What will we say to the open door, to the room full of now? Thank you.
Up next, a very talented poet, Ryan Nakano. He is a Japanese-American poet, journalist, and community organizer, originally born in Sacramento, California, and he has co-founded and co-curates the White Noise Project. And it's based here in Portland, and it's a POC-centered monthly hybrid poetry reading based here, our own city, Portland, Oregon. His work has been published in the Voicemail Poems and Rickshaw magazine. He is currently working on a full-length book of poetry exploring the intersections of suburban planning, race, and identity. Ryan.
It's actually interesting. I realized that my bio, I put Japanese American, and I've started to make invisible part of my identity by saying that. And by that I mean that I'm also a quarter Okinawan. I mean, I think that's important to understand when I read this first piece, which is actually, I'll be honest, more of kind of like a rap, so I hope that's okay. But it's also important to know that my grandma, my mom's side, came from a tiny island called Izena, part of the Okinawa Islands. And I've been doing some research about Shisa, which is the kind of like lion dog mythological character that can be seen like on rooftops. And they're really there for the protection of keeping evil spirits out, but also keeping good spirits in. And this is sort of a piece that I wrote in response to seeing a woman in Okinawa, an older woman returning to the caves that a lot of the Okinawans were forced to kind of hide in during the war. And she was going there like every day. So I was very curious about this, so I wrote this piece. Try not to get too emotional about it. She saw seashells, story told, retell, story old, not for her, little girl, feet swell. She saw seashells, story told, retell, story old, not for her, little girl, feet swell. If I'm a lion, then give me the kingdom. If I'm a dog, bite the hand that feed him. Scraps and we scrap for freedom. Trapped, seen her in a cave. Woman with a metal cane. No name, no mad. No place like no land. Like no base, like no space. Like no face and no hands. And what if we saw what she saw? Would it really make a difference in the present and the spirit like a seesaw? I know there's weight upon the entrance and I only want to hold her hand for a minute. Understand what it means to stand for a village. Try to say something but the words keep slipping. Try to say something but the words keep slipping. I bet you got a roar but the war keep her silent. Bet you know the shore and the lore of the island. Tennis ball but you hold the orb like a lion. She who came before and before her defiance. She saw seashells, story told, retell, story old, not for her, little girl, feet swell. She saw seashells, story told, retell, story old, not for her, little girl, feet swell. Thank you. Yeah, this next piece is about, I worked at a sushi restaurant in Portland, which is a fun time. But you know, you get a lot of interesting questions and conversations with customers. And so this is about one particular experience in which a customer said they wanted the full experience. Not really sure what that meant, but so anyways, I just thought it was funny. So this is called Ode. Ode to the blind swordsman whose eyes she sharpens. Ode to all-you-can-eat vagueness. Ode to woman who likes her teeth like she likes her coffee. Ode to zenning out. Ode to Tanizaki. Ode to fusion and confusion. Ode to Shinto turn Sino turn Twitter turn inward. Ode to stomach. Ode to the unsettled dust in the food truck refused service. Ode to the full experience. Ode to the green glow in the hollow of our mouths. Ode to the shadows. Ode to accents. Ode to the severed head of a Buddha made ornament. Ode to the people preying heavily upon them. Ode to pop culture. Ode to somebody's pops and someone else's culture. Ode to the faceless figures cloaked in the broad brushstroke of an era. Ode to an era. Ode to the remix. Ode to the throwback, ode to erasure, ode to the East, ode to those who are less exotic than Miss Mystery would have it. One more, ode to the olden days of antiquated language, ode to us and our constant reorienting. Isn't this what we are? Ode. Did I have time with that? Okay. Cool. I'm going to read one more piece. It's called Future Fire. Future fire, unborn my son. Melt the gold from the hills, wear it as a garment. undress in a channel, burn Bitcoin for your ancestors, leave fences unfinished. Remember, you are not made to rust. Uproot a blossom, bloom a bit. I hear the astral field might redevelop, spark a wildflower, turn all the roads inward, cast out in chrome, searching for self and self-preservation, for traces of metal wilting in your hands, like a landscape buried in landscape, taking the Shinkansen and horseshit by force, willingly burn everything. Swear if you have to, pray if you have to. Do what you have to, build capital, destroy capital, live by your own code, write your own code. The most Bushido thing you could do is to give back to your heritage. Almost anything you do as an act of resistance is neither either or, and in the end, what is the decision? Do not levitate, stay grounded. Bury yourself in books, in bodies of literature, on a tablet, on an iPad. Doesn't really matter the source. Remember, you are a visionary, and visionaries cite everything. Plug into nature. Navigate ecosystems. Carry out the function of Vine. Create art outside of advertisement. Monopolize your efforts. It will be worth it. You are a future fire. Thanks.
Before we welcome our line dance group, let's all collectively grab one group picture real quick.
1, 2, 3. Don't blink. Well, they say this is the best for last, so I hope this is going to be the finale of this year's celebration. So, you know, I was with the county for almost 27 years now, so I'm getting close to retirement. So Raymond asked me to come and help him with the entertainment part this year, so I'm willing, more happy to help him. So this year I was able to get the best, listen, the best line dance group in Portland, okay? They perform at the casinos, at the temples, Chinatown, you name it, they're there. This is the group, and these kids are from PCC and Madison High School. So they are taking time off to be with us today, you know, so thank you. So I guess let's do it, gang, come on. Thank you, Viet Hong Jr. Line Dance Group.
Thank you for coming. That wraps API Heritage Month event. And thank you to everyone who's helped us make this possible. So thank you.